I get it, you're staring at a dozen speaker options online, trying to picture how each one would actually sound in your living room, and you're scared of spending money on a set that ends up sounding flat or, worse, overwhelms the space. You'd rather not waste a weekend trying to tame a pair of speakers that just don't fit the room or the type of music you listen to. So before I dive into the details, here's the quick way to verify what I'm talking about. The link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. Now, the Monitor Audio Silver 500 isn't a headline-grabbing, ultra-tiny bookshelf speaker. It's a 3-way floor-standing unit that's been built around a 1-inch gold dome tweeter, a 3-inch mid-bass driver, and two 8-inch bass drivers. That layout tells you right away that these speakers are aiming for a full-range experience rather than the just-an-out-o-half-a-bass approach you see on entry-level monitors. What that means in practice is that, if you have a medium to large room, you'll likely hear a more cohesive soundstage with clearer highs and tighter lows than you would with a two-way design that has to stretch its mids across a broader frequency range. So who should actually consider the Silver 500? First, think about the kind of listening you do. If you're into high-resolution streaming services, love to binge a home theater movie with a true-to-life soundtrack, or you have a small home recording setup and need a reference that won't flatten your mix, these speakers could be a good match. The 3-way design gives enough separation that a full-band recording retains its detail, vocals sit up front, guitars stay crisp, and the bass drum doesn't get lost in a wash of mids. On the flip side, if you live in a tiny studio apartment, or you're only looking for an inexpensive plug-and-play solution for background music while you work, the Silver 500 will feel a bit over-engineered. The footprint of the cabinet, even with its sleek black oak veneer, requires a decent amount of floor space, and the bass response is deliberately extended. In a cramped space that can't accommodate this, you might end up with an excess of low-frequency energy that's more muddy than musical. One real-world scenario that really showcases the strengths of this model is a weekend movie night with a small group of friends. Set the Silver 500's shoulder width apart, crank the volume just enough to fill the room, and you'll notice the dialogue stays clear even when the action sequences get booming. Because the tweeter uses Monitor Audio's Uniform Dispersion Waveguide 2, the high frequencies don't just shoot straight ahead, they spread more evenly across a wider listening angle, which means the people sitting a bit off-center still hear those subtle orchestral swells without any harshness. That's something I've read customers often complain about with cheaper floor standers. They either have a narrow sweet spot or they become shrill at the edges. The Silver 500 seems to smooth out that issue, thanks to that gold dome and the waveguide design. Now let's talk about the weaknesses again, in practical terms, not just a list of specs you'd find on a datasheet. The bass drivers are definitely the heart of the system, and they do a solid job of delivering impact, but they rely heavily on the room's acoustics to tame any boominess. In a room with hard floors and minimal furnishings, you might find the low end feels a little boxy after the 30-minute mark of watching a high-intensity action film. This isn't a defect, it's a characteristic of the larger drivers pushing enough air to need some damping. Adding a couple of soft furnishings, an area rug, or even a basic acoustic panel can tame that resonance quickly, but it does add a small, often overlooked cost to the overall setup. Another point that comes up when you compare these speakers to similar price range options is that they don't include a dedicated crossover tweak knob on the back. Some users like to fine-tune the high-mid crossover to suit their personal taste or to adapt to a particular amplifier. With the Silver 500, you're essentially trusting Monitor Audio's engineering choices, which are solid, but if you like to dial in those adjustments yourself, you'll have to add an external crossover or an EQ stage in your receiver. That's one more piece of gear you might not have counted on when budgeting. What about the amplifier match? These speakers are fairly demanding in terms of power. Monitor Audio rates them at around 100 watts per channel to really bring them to life. If you're working with a modest stereo receiver that tops out at 50 watts per channel, you'll notice the dynamics feel a bit restrained, especially during fast-paced music or dynamic movie scenes. Pairing them with a more robust amp, like a 150 watt per channel solid-state model, or a quality tube amp if you're after that warm glow, will let the Silver 500 breathe and reveal the nuance the 3-way design promises. So, if you're already happy with your current amp and it's on the lower